When a federal appeals court speaks, people listen, but this time the message wasn't just legal, it was thunderous. Donald Trump didn't just lose another case, he got dismantled. 3 judges didn't simply disagree with his argument. They called it delusional, constitutionally empty, and dangerously misinformed. That kind of language doesn't come lightly. And what makes it even more striking is that Warren Buffett, a man who almost never comments on political chaos, chose to speak. When the Oracle of Omaha breaks his silence to weigh in on a court ruling, something seismic has shifted. This wasn't just about Trump's legal team getting outmaneuvered. It was a clear, sharp, institutional rejection of his claim that he's somehow immune, not just politically, but legally untouchable. And what's even more revealing is Trump's reaction. It didn't reflect strategy. It showed isolation. Increasingly, even his most loyal allies are drifting away, quietly creating distance from the storm that follows him everywhere. And still, Trump doubled down, refusing to concede even an inch. At the heart of all this is a legal fantasy. Trump has been pushing for years that everything he did while in office, no matter how aggressive or unconstitutional, is protected by something he calls absolute immunity. That includes January 6th, pressuring state officials, and even manipulating federal agencies to back his narrative. Since leaving office in January 2021, Trump has insisted that the shield of the presidency still protects him from prosecution. But now, 3 years into a maze of criminal indictments, civil lawsuits, and federal investigations, that argument is finally colliding with reality. This collision has been building. State prosecutors in Georgia and New York are pursuing their own cases. Federal prosecutors have indicted him on multiple fronts. But all of it, every charge and every defense, revolves around one question. Can a former president be held accountable for potentially criminal acts committed while in office? It's a legal and constitutional dilemma, one that courts never wanted to face, but now can't ignore. And in the middle of it all stands Trump, still the presumed Republican frontrunner for 2024, trying to juggle political ambition with mounting legal peril. Let's be clear, this isn't just about Trump anymore. It's about the future of the presidency. It's about whether any individual, no matter how powerful, popular, or polarizing, can stand above the law. The Federal Appeals Court didn't just reject Trump's theory of immunity. They dismantled it brick by brick with words so blunt and direct that legal analysts are calling the ruling unprecedented. Around October 28th, when the decision dropped, the court's language was startling. Trump's legal arguments weren't just wrong, they were, according to the court, based on a fundamental misunderstanding of executive power. This wasn't behind closed doors. It wasn't quiet. It was public, it was loud, and it was meant to be. The court released the decision in strong, deliberate language, aimed not just at Trump, but at the country. And the shockwaves were immediate. Political insiders, legal experts, and business leaders all began asking the same question. If a bipartisan federal panel can deliver such a decisive blow to Trump's strategy, what's next for his campaign? What happens to the legal and political machine he's built around the illusion of untouchability? It's not the first time Trump has had his legal theories shredded by the courts, but this time it's more severe. Trump has always tested the boundaries of the law, and when those boundaries push back, his instinct is to attack. He calls judges corrupt. He claims prosecutors are political operatives. He labels rulings as part of a vast conspiracy against him. But this strategy, the one where he bulldozes through every obstacle with sheer force of personality, is beginning to fail. Just look at the pattern. Remember Jeff Sessions, Trump's first attorney general, one of his earliest supporters? The moment Sessions followed ethical guidelines and recused himself from the Russia probe, Trump turned on him publicly and relentlessly. Bill Barr, handpicked by Trump and loyal through most of the Mueller investigation until he finally acknowledged there was no widespread election fraud. Within days, Trump called him cowardly and weak. Mike Pence, after 4 years of unwavering loyalty, Trump labeled him a traitor for refusing to help overturn the election on January 6th. Even Kevin McCarthy, who initially blamed Trump for the Capitol attack before backtracking to regain his support, eventually found himself on the outs. And now Trump has a new target, the federal judiciary itself. The same courts that have repeatedly extended him procedural patience are now being painted by Trump as obstacles in his path. Loyalty for Trump has always been transactional. The moment someone stops echoing his narrative, they're discarded. So what exactly triggered the court to issue such a brutal ruling? It all circles back to the idea of absolute immunity, a concept Trump's lawyers have been clinging to, arguing that presidential actions are completely shielded from criminal prosecution. The other side, federal prosecutors, maintain that no one is above the law, not even the president. This isn't just legal sparring. It's a constitutional standoff over the very nature of presidential power. Trump didn't just defend his position. He went on the offensive. He declared that not only was he immune, but that any limits on presidential power would destroy the office itself. His legal team pushed an extreme stance that presidents must be free from fear of prosecution, even after leaving office, or the entire system will crumble. But for the judges hearing this case, that wasn't a legal argument. It was a red flag. During oral arguments in early October, Trump's attorneys struggled. Hypotheticals about criminal behavior went unanswered. Legal precedents failed to back up their claims. And as the courtroom questions intensified, it became clear the judges weren't buying it. The more Trump's team insisted on blanket immunity, the more it seemed like a direct challenge to the rule of law itself. Federal judges aren't just lawyers in robes. They're protectors of the constitutional system. And what Trump was asking for sounded a lot like monarchy, not democracy. Worse, Trump's team argued that prosecuting a former president would irreparably damage the institution of the presidency. The implication? That presidents must be allowed to break the law if it protects the office. For the appeals court, that crossed a line. Suggesting that executive power should be immune from criminal scrutiny wasn't just wrong, it was, in their view, a betrayal of the constitutional order. And that's when the hammer came down. When a federal court takes the time to craft a 57-page opinion, they're not just issuing a verdict, they're building a message. And that's exactly what happened when the three-judge appeals panel, fully unanimous, delivered what legal scholars are now calling one of the most detailed and forceful rejections of executive overreach in modern history. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a complete takedown, meticulously structured, fact-based, and grounded in constitutional doctrine. These judges didn't just say Trump was wrong. They proved it with original intent from the founders, with legal precedent from the Nixon era, and with direct quotes from the Federalist Papers. They left no part of Trump's immunity argument intact. Every point Trump's lawyers raised was addressed, dissected, and rebutted. The court explained that accepting Trump's theory of absolute immunity would destroy the very checks and balances that keep American democracy functional. They emphasized that our system was never designed to grant permanent protection to anyone, especially not the one individual entrusted with the highest office in the land. If anything, the founders built the presidency with clear accountability in mind. That's why impeachment exists. That's why criminal law applies to all citizens, including former presidents. Trump's claims were more than flawed. They were, in the court's words, constitutionally baseless. So what does Trump do when backed into a legal corner? He doubles down on the very tactics that got him there in the first place. His rhetoric ramps up. His fundraising emails become more aggressive. He frames every ruling as proof of a corrupt system targeting him. But here's the bind he's in. Legally, he has to deal with these rulings. He has to face the trials. He has to prepare appeals. He can't ignore the judiciary, no matter how loud his political attacks get. But politically, he can't show even a sliver of vulnerability without alienating his core supporters. His base wants to see him as a fighter, as a victim of political persecution, not as someone acknowledging the rule of law. This leaves Trump walking a razor-thin line. On one side, if he continues to denounce the judiciary and accuse the courts of being part of a conspiracy, he may further solidify his political brand, but he also makes it more likely that judges rule against him. After all, no court likes being bullied. On the other side, if he starts to play by the rules, if he tones down his rhetoric and respects the process, he risks looking weak to the very people he depends on to fuel his campaign. It's a lose-lose situation, and it's one of his own making. Now, Step back and think about the bigger picture. This isn't just about Trump's courtroom performance. It's about his pattern, a pattern of demanding loyalty, punishing dissent, and treating every challenge as a personal betrayal. We've seen it time and time again. Judges who rule against him become corrupt. Lawyers who won't bend the law are called weak. Officials who follow legal procedures are traitors. And now, entire branches of government are being dragged into his cycle of loyalty and blame. That's what makes this moment so important. The Federal Appeals Court didn't just rule on Trump's legal argument. They stood up to the political pressure that comes with it. And that takes courage, especially in today's environment. Every conservative lawyer watching this unfold is now asking themselves, what happens when Trump turns his fury on the judiciary? What happens when the judges themselves become the next deep state enemy in his narrative? It's creating a fracture within the Republican legal establishment. On one end, you've got those who are quietly disturbed by Trump's escalating attacks on the courts. They believe in constitutional order. They've spent their careers defending legal institutions, and now they're worried about being tainted by association. On the other end, you've got the diehard loyalists, those who believe the courts are part of a system rigged against Trump and want to see judges fall in line or be replaced altogether. Then came the moment that truly underscored the seriousness of the situation. Warren Buffett, one of the most respected voices in American finance, and someone who rarely comments on politics, issued a rare public statement. On October 30th, in response to the court's ruling, Buffett spoke not just as a businessman, but as a citizen. He called the decision a necessary affirmation of American legal principles. That phrase, simple and deliberate, carried weight. Buffett didn't delve into politics. He didn't take sides in a campaign. But he did express concern that Trump's claims of immunity, if accepted, would shake the foundations of American trust, the same trust that the entire economy relies on. Buffett has always believed in the power of institutions. He's built an empire on the assumption that American governance, courts, and contracts operate predictably and fairly. So when he says a court ruling is essential to preserve that balance, it matters. It means the ripple effects of Trump's legal strategy are now reaching deep into the business world. And that ripple got bigger fast. On October 31st, the Justice Department responded with speed. Special Prosecutor Jack Smith filed a motion for expedited proceedings. No more delays. No more immunity games. The motion made clear that Trump's immunity arguments were, in their words, dilatory tactics, just an effort to slow the process and avoid accountability. Smith quoted directly from the appeals court's ruling, emphasizing that Trump's legal claims had no constitutional grounding. The message was firm. The time for stalling is over. That urgency wasn't just symbolic. Every day that goes by without resolution brings the 2024 election closer. The stakes are enormous. If trials begin after ballots are cast, public confidence in the system could fracture even further. And everyone involved, prosecutors, judges, legal scholars, understands that this isn't just about one man. It's about what kind of legal and political standard we're setting for the presidency itself. So let's talk about the reaction from legal experts. And to be honest, they didn't hold back. Conservative legal scholar Jonathan Turley, someone who's often defended Trump, said outright that the former president's arguments were legally untenable, a phrase that cuts deeper than it sounds. In legal language, that's basically saying there's no foundation here. There's no real argument. This isn't grounded in law. And when a conservative scholar uses that kind of terminology, it signals that the legal consensus across ideological lines is turning sharply against Trump. The criticism didn't stop there. The Federal Bar Association went as far as calling out Trump's legal strategy publicly, an extremely rare move. Bar associations typically avoid direct confrontation unless something has gone seriously off course. Their message was unmistakable. Trump's arguments weren't simply weak. They were fundamentally incompatible with the Constitution. For legal analysts, the last time we saw such a sweeping judicial rejection of executive power was back in 1974 during United States v. Nixon, the case that forced the release of the Watergate tapes. That comparison sends a powerful message. Nixon's case was monumental, reshaping the limits of presidential power. For Trump's immunity claim to be mentioned in the same breath means the courts view this dispute as equally historic, equally consequential, and equally dangerous if handled incorrectly. And what makes the situation even more striking is who is now speaking out. Andrew McCarthy, a former federal prosecutor and a well-known conservative voice on Fox News, someone who defended Trump throughout both impeachment trials, went on air and delivered a statement that stunned viewers. He said that if the Supreme Court upholds this ruling, which he believes it will, then Trump's legal strategy collapses completely. No more delays, no more immunity shield, no more stalling trials until after the election. McCarthy even said that based on what he has seen, conviction is likely. Hearing that from a conservative legal mind on Fox News of all places tells you just how dramatically the ground has shifted. Then came Judge Michael Luttig, a respected conservative jurist who has advised multiple Republican administrations. He said the appeals court opinion was so complete, so airtight, that the Supreme Court might not even bother taking the case. Think about that. A former president makes a sweeping claim of absolute immunity from criminal prosecution, and the Supreme Court could simply refuse to hear it because the lower court's ruling is already ironclad. When voices from both sides of the political spectrum start calling something a devastating rejection, it's no longer just partisan noise, it's a constitutional alarm bell. This isn't just an academic debate or a courtroom exercise. It has very real consequences for politics, for the 2024 election, and for the future of the presidency itself. Politically, Trump is already under pressure. His polling with independent voters has slipped as more indictments pile up. Republican candidates privately worry that being tied to Trump could cost them key swing states. And now, to add fuel to the fire, a federal appeals court has declared that his central defense, the idea that he can't be prosecuted, has no legal basis whatsoever. Democrats see opportunity in this moment. They're already framing the ruling as proof that Trump believes he's above the law, willing to ignore constitutional limits whenever they get in his way. And the fact that this conclusion is coming directly from federal judges, not partisan commentators, makes the political messaging even stronger. Expect to see quotes from this ruling used in campaign ads, debates, and press conferences all throughout 2024. For Democrats, this decision is a gift, a legal document that reinforces their central argument that Trump threatens democratic institutions. But while Democrats might celebrate the ruling, the judiciary finds itself in a far more complicated position. Federal judges work hard to remain above the political fray. They don't want to be seen as partisan actors. Yet with Trump's relentless attacks on the courts, the appeals panel had to make a choice. Stay silent and allow Trump's narrative of absolute immunity to go unchallenged, or speak firmly and risk being pulled into the political spotlight. They chose the latter, likely believing that the integrity of the legal system was more important than avoiding controversy. And that brings us to the heart of this: equal justice under law. The foundational question is brutally simple. Can a president commit crimes and walk away untouched, shielded forever because of the power they once held? Trump says yes. The courts say absolutely not. If Trump's view wins, it would fundamentally transform how American democracy works. The founders specifically rejected the idea of leaders who stand above the law. They lived under kings who claimed immunity from prosecution. They intentionally built a system to prevent the rise of someone who could act without accountability. But Trump has always struggled with that concept. He sees limits as insults, oversight as sabotage, and legal barriers as obstacles meant to be crushed. If the presidency were granted permanent immunity from criminal law, future presidents could commit crimes with no fear of consequences. That's not a hypothetical. That's a blueprint for authoritarian power. And that's why the stakes of this case stretch far beyond Trump himself. It's not about one man. It's about the long-term structure of the American government. Trump's behavior has already changed political norms. He's repeatedly attacked courts, undermined trust in elections, leaned on federal agencies for personal gain, and encouraged supporters to believe that any system that rules against him must be corrupt. Each time those norms crack, the Democratic foundation weakens a little more. If Trump's immunity claim stood, it would be the final blow. It would mark the moment when presidents became untouchable, when accountability collapsed, and when future leaders could violate the law with impunity. And that's the concern legal scholars keep raising. Even if Trump loses, The very fact that his claim got this far pushes the country closer to accepting ideas that once seemed unthinkable. If absolute immunity is even debatable, it's already a sign of democratic erosion. Now imagine what happens if a future president, smarter and more disciplined than Trump, decides to exploit the same loopholes. These precedents don't vanish. They linger. They shape the future. As we look toward November 2024, the political implications are massive. The narrative forming now, Trump losing challenge after challenge, being rebuked by judges he appointed, getting caught in self-made legal traps, is not the narrative Republicans want heading into a national election. Voters don't reward chaos. They don't reward individuals who seem legally unstable. They reward stability, competence, and trust. And right now, Trump's legal record projects the opposite. At the same time, Democrats are gearing up to campaign on restoring faith in institutions, rebuilding respect for the Constitution, and reestablishing the rule of law. After years of Trump-driven turmoil, they'll argue that electing them means returning to normal governance where judges aren't attacked daily and constitutional crises aren't headline news. That argument hits harder when federal judges, not politicians, are effectively saying the same thing. So here's the deal. Donald Trump didn't just lose a court case. He was publicly, forcefully, and unanimously rejected by a panel of federal judges who said his core legal argument was constitutionally indefensible. That phrase alone is going to echo across political campaigns, legal forums, and the 2024 election stage. It's not just another defeat. It's the collapse of a defense he's leaned on for years. And it's the beginning of a new reality. If this ruling stands, then the days of presidents claiming they're untouchable could be over. This is more than a personal blow to Trump. It's a defining moment for how we, as a country, treat the office of the presidency. Are presidents public servants accountable under the law, or are they above it all immune simply because of the title they once held? The answer to that question could reshape American democracy for a generation. And while Trump continues to frame every legal challenge as a political attack, the judiciary just drew a hard line. They said, loud and clear, that power doesn't come with permanent protection. And that message didn't come from political opponents. It came from a federal appeals court judges who understand the weight of precedent, who know what it means when their words are entered into history. Their decision wasn't fiery or dramatic. It was methodical, layered with legal citations, structured to withstand the pressure of review by the Supreme Court. But the underlying message was unmistakable. No one, not even a president, is above the law. The political consequences are already rippling through both parties. Republicans are being forced to choose again between standing by Trump or standing by the rule of law. Some are doubling down on loyalty, echoing his claims of persecution, suggesting that the legal system is being weaponized against him. Others, particularly those with legal backgrounds or long-term political ambitions, are noticeably quiet. They understand the long game. Associating themselves with a legal argument this week could come back to haunt them. Democrats, meanwhile, are positioning themselves for a messaging campaign that practically writes itself. They can now point to judicial rulings written by nonpartisan courts to make their case that Trump has consistently placed himself above the Constitution. They'll use this to contrast their vision of governance, one that respects institutions, values checks and balances, and operates under legal norms. And in an election likely to be decided by swing voters and independents, that contrast could prove decisive. But let's not lose sight of what's happening within the legal process itself. Trump's strategy has always been twofold: delay everything and discredit everyone. Delay the trials long enough to reach the election, discredit the prosecutors, judges, and entire system so thoroughly that public opinion turns his way. That strategy has worked in the past, but it's hitting serious roadblocks now. With this appeals court ruling, delay is no longer easy. And discrediting a unanimous panel of respected judges, that's a lot harder than attacking one individual. What we're seeing now is the result of years of legal maneuvering, finally reaching a breaking point. Trump has pushed every possible boundary, appealed every unfavorable decision, and repeated his narrative to the point of exhaustion. But the courts, slow and methodical by design, are now catching up. They've listened. they've reviewed, and now they're responding, not with emotion, not with political gamesmanship, but with rulings that are firm, reasoned, and grounded in constitutional law. And in doing so, they're forcing the country to confront uncomfortable truths, namely that a former president, one who's still actively campaigning for the White House, may soon be on trial for criminal conduct. That reality used to be unthinkable, but it's now increasingly likely. And it's not because of partisan prosecutors or activist judges. It's because of Trump's own choices, his legal arguments, and his refusal to accept the limits of power. The appeals court laid out those limits with clarity. They said presidential immunity is not a blank check. It doesn't extend to criminal conduct. It doesn't shield actions taken for personal or political gain. It doesn't rewrite the Constitution just because one man believes he deserves special treatment. That kind of logic, they warned, would turn the presidency into a throne, and that's exactly what the founders feared. Let's not forget that the Constitution was written as a response to monarchy. The founders rejected the idea that any one person could stand above the law. That's why we have a separation of powers. That's why there's a system of checks and balances. And that's why the courts are now taking a stand, and not against a person, but against a philosophy that says power is its own justification. Trump's team, in contrast, continues to argue that without immunity, every future president will be too afraid to act decisively. But that argument misses the point entirely. Presidents aren't supposed to act with impunity. They're supposed to act within the law. Fear of accountability isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It's the very thing that prevents abuse of power, and suggesting otherwise reveals exactly why this court decision is so necessary. Because if this ruling is overturned, if Trump's theory of immunity is accepted, then every president going forward would have reason to believe they can break the law and never face consequences. That would mark the end of constitutional accountability. And it wouldn't just affect the White House. It would affect every branch of government, every citizen, and every future election. That's what this moment represents. It's not just a courtroom loss. It's a test of whether the American legal system still works, whether it can hold even the most powerful accountable, whether the Constitution is still more than a piece of paper, and whether the idea of a republic, of a government by laws, not men, still has meaning in the 21st century. We're now entering a phase where the stakes are rising by the day. The Supreme Court is likely to weigh in soon. Multiple criminal trials are waiting in the wings. And as the 2024 election looms, the choices we make in courtrooms, in Congress, and at the ballot box will determine not just who holds office, but what kind of country we become. The most important part of this story isn't what happens to Donald Trump, it's what happens to the system after him. Because whether he wins or loses his legal battles, the arguments he's making and the precedents he's trying to set won't just vanish. If left unchecked, they will linger in the political bloodstream, tempting future leaders to test the same boundaries, to defy oversight, to place themselves beyond accountability. That's why this federal appeals court ruling matters. That's why its language was so direct. The judges weren't just ruling on one man's claim. They were defending the fundamental structure of American democracy. It's easy to get lost in the details, the motions, the appeals, the media spin. But underneath all of it is a single urgent question. Are we willing to let the presidency become a shield for criminal behavior? If the answer is yes, then we're no longer governed by law, we're governed by personality. If the answer is no, and the courts are clearly saying no, then we still have a system that functions even when under pressure. And pressure is exactly what's coming next. The Supreme Court is likely to take up this case within weeks. Trump's legal team will almost certainly ask them to overturn the appeals court ruling. But the justices will have to consider not only the legal details, but the broader consequences of their decision. If they uphold the ruling, it sets a clear and lasting boundary around executive power. If they reject it, it opens the door to a new era of unchecked presidential authority. The timing couldn't be more critical. As the 2024 election season accelerates, the narrative forming now will shape how voters see the race. If Trump is portrayed as someone constantly battling the courts and losing, it will affect how swing voters evaluate his fitness for office. It's not just about policy anymore. It's about legality, credibility, and trust. And voters pay close attention to those themes, especially when they're echoed by institutions like the judiciary. Democrats are already positioning themselves around this issue. Their messaging is centered on restoring normalcy, protecting institutions, and respecting the rule of law. And while that message won't energize every base voter, it will resonate with the moderates and independents.